Welcome to Mysterious Sleep Tales, where gentle stories and soothing voices help you drift off to sleep. Before we begin tonight's story, let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It's always wonderful to see our community coming together from so many corners of the world. Now it's time to settle in. Find a comfortable spot, whether it's your bed with soft pillows nearby or a chair that knows your shape. There's nothing you need to do right now, nowhere you need to go, no thoughts that require your attention. Everything that awaits, you will wait a little longer. You can close your eyes if you wish, or gaze at a soft, distant point where nothing needs focusing. There's no rush here. There never is. So let's go together to a place not far from the gentle world of sleep. Let's go to a small, ordinary street in a town in the heart of England, on an evening when the rain has just begun and the last rays of daylight are silently hidden behind the rooftops. This is the kind of evening that arrives unannounced, settling upon the chimneys, slate roofs, and narrow sidewalks with a patient precision as if it had done so 1,000 times before. The year doesn't really matter, only that it belongs to an earlier time, a time of gas lamps and cobblestones, of horses standing motionless on their poles, and shop fronts capturing the last faint traces of the fading sky with their painted lettering. Let's say sometime in the 1870s, but you don't need to stick to a specific date because the evening itself doesn't seem to count. The street is a modest one, lined with terraced buildings of dark brick, their window ledges dusted with the residue of coal smoke that has settled there over the course of many seasons. A few of the windows glow faintly from within, the light of candles or oil lamps pressing against the glass with a gentle amber warmth, as though each room beyond were a small lantern set against the coming dark. At the far end of the street, where the pavement narrows and a low iron railing marks the boundary of a small churchyard, a single gas lamp has been lit. Its flame, enclosed within a glass housing, trembles softly in the damp air, casting a pale circle of light upon the stones below. The rain, which began as little more than a fine mist some quarter of an hour ago, has thickened now into a steady, quiet fall, the sort of rain that does not drive or lash, but simply descends, patient and unhurried, filling the gutters with a low murmur and darkening the brickwork from russet to a deep, dull brown. Halfway along this street, between a tobacconist whose shutters have already been drawn for the evening and a narrow house whose front step has been recently scrubbed, there stands a workshop. It is not a grand establishment. There is no gilded sign above the door, no broad window dressed to catch the eye of passers-by. Only a small wooden board, hung from an iron bracket and swinging very slightly in the damp air, bears the name of the trade carried on within. The lettering, painted in a steady hand some years ago and now beginning to soften at its edges where the weather has worked upon it, reads simply the word Upholsterer, and beneath it, in smaller script, the name of the proprietor, which we shall say is Mr. Edmund Hale, though he is not the sort of man whose name one hears spoken often in the street or called across a busy market. The front of the shop is narrow, the door set slightly back from the pavement beneath a shallow arch of brickwork. To one side of the door, a single window, its glass divided into small panes, offers a dim view of the interior, though at this hour the light within is low and the contents of the room beyond are more suggested than revealed. One might glimpse the back of a wooden chair, partly stripped of its covering, or the edge of a workbench, or perhaps the pale curve of a roll of fabric leaning against the wall. But the true heart of the workshop is not this front room at all for Mr. Hale conducts the quieter and more considered portions of his work in the back room, a space set behind a heavy curtain of dark green baize, where the noise of the street and the occasional rattle of a passing cart are reduced to the faintest of murmurs, and where the hours pass with a stillness that belongs more to the countryside than to any town. It is to this back room that we shall go now, stepping softly, as one does when entering a place where concentration lives and where the rhythm of careful labor has established itself so thoroughly that even the air seems reluctant to move too quickly. The room is not large. One might cross it in perhaps a dozen paces, were it not for the chairs and frames and miscellaneous articles of furniture that occupy much of its floor. The ceiling is low, braced by two beams of dark oak that have absorbed the warmth and the smell of the room over many years and now carry in their grain a faint sweetness, part beeswax and part the dry, dusty scent of horsehair that has been handled and shaped and tucked in a place beneath countless layers of fabric. Along the far wall, a wooden shelf runs at chest height, and upon it are arranged the implements and materials of the upholsterer's trade with the careful order of a man who knows precisely where each thing belongs. There are tins of tacks, their lids slightly ajar, revealing the dull blue-black points within, each one cut sharp and fine, ready to be taken up between the fingertips and set in place with a single, measured tap. There are balls of twine, some thick and coarse for the lashing of springs, others finer for the stitching of edges, wound tight and resting in their places like small, patient creatures waiting to be called upon. There are needles of various kinds, some long and curved, designed to pass through layers of hessian and scrim and horsehair in a single arcing motion, others straight and stout, meant for the more deliberate work of buttoning and tufting. Beside these, a pair of shears lies open upon a folded square of calico, their blades catching what little light reaches them from the single oil lamp that burns upon the corner of the workbench, its flame steady and low behind a glass chimney that has not been cleaned in some days and has taken on a faint amber tint from the accumulation of soot. Mr. Hale is here. He is seated upon a low stool, the kind without a back, which allows him to lean forward over his work or to turn with ease from one task to another without rising. He is a man of perhaps 50 years, though one might be forgiven for guessing either side of that figure, for his face, while marked by the years, carries a certain quietness that makes it difficult to read in terms of age alone. His hair, once dark, has grayed at the temples and along the line where it falls across his forehead, and he wears it somewhat longer than is fashionable, so that it occasionally slips forward when he bends to his work and must be pushed back with the heel of his hand, a gesture so habitual that he performs it without awareness. His eyes are brown, deep-set beneath brows that have thickened with the years, and they possess that particular quality of attention that belongs to those who work with their hands and who have learned to see not merely the surface of things but the structure beneath. He wears a waistcoat of dark gray wool over a shirt whose sleeves have been rolled to the elbow, revealing forearms that are lean and corded with the quiet strength of a man whose labor, while not heavy in the manner of a blacksmith's or a quarryman's, is nonetheless constant and exacting. His hands are perhaps his most notable feature, for they are at once rough and precise, the fingers broad at the tips where years of pressing tacks and pulling fabric have thickened the skin, yet capable of the most delicate adjustments, the sort of touch that can feel through a layer of calico whether the horsehair beneath lies smooth and even or has gathered itself into an unwanted ridge. Before him, resting upon a pair of low wooden trestles, is a chair. It is a dining chair of the kind one might find in any respectable household of the period, with a frame of dark walnut whose carved details, a modest scrollwork along the crest rail, and a gentle turning of the front legs, speak of a level of craftsmanship that, while not extravagant, is honest and sound. The seat has been stripped of its former covering, and the frame sits exposed, revealing the architecture of its interior with the frank openness of a house whose walls have been taken away. The jute webbing that forms the foundation of the seat is still in place, its interlaced strips taut and firm, nailed to the underside of the frame with tacks whose heads have darkened with time. Above this webbing, the coiled springs, 9 of them, arranged in 3 rows of 3, have been tied into position with lengths of cord that run from rail to rail, holding each spring upright and preventing it from shifting under the weight of a sitter. The springs themselves are of good quality, their coils even and closely wound, the sort that will serve for many years yet without losing their resilience. It is not the springs, however, that occupy Mr. Hale's attention this evening, for they have already been attended to in the earlier hours of the afternoon, when the light from the window was still sufficient to work by, and when his fingers were perhaps a touch more nimble than they are now, at this later hour, when the day has begun to settle into his joints with a familiar, mild stiffness. What occupies him now is the layer of hessian that must be laid over the springs and secured to the frame, forming the platform upon which the stuffing will be built. He has already cut the hessian to size, a square of coarse, tightly woven fabric the color of oatmeal, and it lies draped across the seat like a cloth laid over a table that has not yet been set for supper. He takes up the hessian at one edge, folding it under itself to create a neat hem, and positions it against the inner edge of the back rail. With his left hand he holds the fabric firm, his thumb pressing it flat against the wood, while with his right he reaches for a tack from the open tin beside him. The tack is small, scarcely longer than the width of his thumbnail, and he takes it up between his forefinger and thumb with the ease of long practice, setting its point against the folded hessian without needing to look. The hammer, a tack hammer with a narrow head and a handle worn smooth by years of use, is already in his other hand, and he brings it down with a single, soft tap, just firm enough to set the tack in place, but no more, for the wood of the frame is old and must be treated with respect. The sound of the tap is very small. It enters the room like a whisper and is absorbed almost immediately by the soft materials that fill the space. The rolls of fabric leaning against the wall, the bundles of horsehair resting in their sacks, the half-finished cushion on the bench behind him, all of which conspire to muffle and gentle every sound that occurs within these walls. It is the kind of sound that, once heard, becomes a companion to the silence rather than an interruption of it, a small, rhythmic reassurance that someone is here, that hands are moving, that quiet, purposeful work is being done. He sets another tack, and another, spacing them at intervals of perhaps 2 inches along the rail, each one receiving the same single, measured tap, the same brief, soft report. Between each tap there is a pause, not of hesitation, but of consideration, as Mr. Hale adjusts the tension of the fabric with his fingers, ensuring that it lies flat and even across the springs beneath, neither too taut, which would prevent the springs from compressing as they should, nor too slack, which would allow the stuffing above to shift and settle unevenly over time. It is this balance, this sensitivity to the precise degree of tension, that distinguishes the work of a careful upholsterer from that of a hasty one, and Mr. Hale, whatever else may be said of him, is not a hasty man. The rain continues outside. He can hear it, faintly, through the wall that separates the back room from the narrow yard behind the shop, where a few flagstones and a low brick wall give way to the backs of the houses on the next street. The sound is a steady, gentle percussion, without rhythm or pattern, simply the accumulation of countless small impacts, each raindrop arriving at its own moment and in its own place, contributing to a whole that is greater and softer than any of its parts. It is the sort of sound that fills the spaces between other sounds, that rounds the edges of silence, and makes the quiet feel inhabited rather than empty. Mr. Hale does not listen to the rain with any deliberate attention. It is simply there, as the warmth of the oil lamp is there, as the faint smell of linseed oil and horsehair is there, as the weight of the hammer in his hand is there. These things compose the atmosphere of his evening work, and he moves within them as naturally as a man moves within his own thoughts, aware of them without attending to them, held by them without being constrained. He has worked in this room for the better part of 20 years, having taken over the premises from his father, who was also an upholsterer and who taught him the trade when he was still a boy, showing him how to tie a spring with a knot that would not slip, how to build a stitched edge that would hold its shape for decades, how to read the grain of a piece of horsehair with his fingertips and know whether it was of good quality or whether it had been mixed with cheaper fibers to save cost. His father's hands had been larger than his own, and rougher, the hands of a man who had worked through harder times and who had never quite lost the wariness of one for whom comfort was not a given, but a thing to be earned and maintained with effort. Mr. Hale remembers those hands with a fondness that does not diminish with the years, remembers the way they would hold a curved needle with surprising delicacy, the way they would smooth a piece of velvet with a single, slow stroke, checking for any imperfection in the nap. He does not think of these things consciously as he works, but they are present in the way that all deeply learned things are present, folded into the movements of his own hands, expressed in the angle at which he holds the hammer, in the pressure of his thumb against the fabric, in the patience with which he waits between one tack and the next. The Hessian is now secured along the back rail, and he moves to the side, shifting his stool with a soft scrape against the floorboards, which are of plain deal and have been worn smooth in the places where he most often sits or stands. He begins the same process along the left rail, folding the hem, positioning the fabric, setting the tacks one by one with that same unhurried rhythm. The lamp flickers briefly as a draft finds its way through some unseen gap in the wall or the frame of the window, and the shadows in the room shift and resettle. The shapes of the chairs and the rolls of fabric rearranging themselves momentarily before returning to their former positions, as though they had merely turned in their sleep. On the workbench behind him, several other projects await their turn. There is a small footstool whose top has been removed and whose frame sits bare, its mahogany darkened to the color of strong tea, ready to be re-webbed and restuffed. Beside it, a parlor chair with a curved back has been partially completed, its seat already padded and covered in a deep green damask whose pattern of trailing leaves and small flowers catches the lamplight and seems almost to move within the fabric, as though the leaves were stirring in some gentle interior breeze. The chair's back remains unfinished, the scrim stretched over the first stuffing but not yet stitched into its final shape, and a row of buttons, covered in the same green damask, lies in a small wooden dish on the bench, waiting to be drawn through the padding with a long needle and a length of strong linen thread. This is the work of deep buttoning, a technique that Mr. Hale performs with particular care, for it requires not only strength in the hands, but a precise sense of spacing and symmetry, an ability to feel through the layers of fabric and padding to the frame beneath, and to draw each button to exactly the right depth, so that the surface of the finished piece rises and falls in even diamond-shaped pockets, each one plump and firmly held. It is a task he will return to tomorrow, when the light is better and his fingers are fresh, for it is not the sort of work one undertakes at the end of a long day, when the temptation to pull a button a fraction too tight, to set it a fraction too far to one side, is greater than it would be in the clarity of the morning. For now, the Hessian is enough. The simple, repetitive act of folding and tacking, has settled into him like a slow pulse, and he finds, as he often does at this hour, that his thoughts have quieted to match the rhythm of his hands. The concerns of the day, such small concerns as they were, a delivery of horsehair that arrived a day later than promised, a customer who wished to change the fabric she had chosen for the third time, a slight ache in the joint of his right thumb that comes and goes with the weather, have receded to the margins of his mind, where they rest without urgency, like letters placed upon a mantelpiece to be attended to at some later time. He reaches the corner of the frame, where the side rail meets the front, and here he must take particular care, for the Hessian must be folded neatly around the angle of the wood, without bunching or creating any unnecessary thickness that might show through the finished covering. He sets down the hammer and takes up the Hessian with both hands, smoothing it with his palms, feeling for the point at which the fabric wishes to fold naturally, and then guiding it into place with a series of small, precise tucks, each one held momentarily between finger and thumb before being secured with a tack. It is the kind of task that rewards patience above all else in Mr. Hale gives it the full measure of his attention, his breathing slow and even, his eyes focused upon the small area of fabric and wood before him, the rest of the room falling away into a comfortable blur. The oil lamp hisses very softly, a sound so faint and so constant that it has long since ceased to register in his awareness. The flame within the glass chimney burns with a steady, golden light that touches the surfaces nearest to it, the edge of the workbench, the curve of the hammer's handle, the backs of Mr. Hale's hands, with a warmth that seems almost liquid, pooling in the hollows and running along the ridges of his knuckles like sunlight on the surface of still water. Beyond the reach of the lamp, the room darkens by degrees, the far corners gathering a soft, deep shadow that is not oppressive but restful, the kind of darkness that invites stillness rather than unease. The chair beneath his hands is beginning to take shape now, or rather, it is beginning to return to a shape it once held and has temporarily lost, for the work of an upholsterer is as much restoration as creation, a giving back of comfort and form to things that have grown tired with use. The Hessian, now secured along 3 of the 4 rails, lies smooth and taut across the springs, and when Mr. Hale presses his palm gently against its surface, he can feel the springs respond beneath, yielding slightly and then pressing back with a quiet, contained energy like a held breath preparing to release. This is as it should be. The springs are alive beneath the Hessian, ready to receive the weight of a body and to return it gently, and the Hessian holds them in their place without restricting their movement, a partnership of tension and give that is, in its own modest way, a small feat of engineering. He begins the final rail, the front, which is the most visible portion of the seat, and therefore the one that demands the greatest neatness. Here, the hem of the Hessian must be particularly clean, the tacks set at even intervals, the fabric lying flat without the slightest wrinkle or pucker. Mr. Hale adjusts his position on the stool, leaning forward slightly, and begins the process once more, the rhythm of fold, position, tap, fold, position, tap, resuming as naturally as a heartbeat that has paused for a moment and then found its pace again. Outside, the evening has deepened. The rain, if anything, has grown a shade quieter, as though it too were settling in for the night, content to fall steadily and without fuss upon the rooftops and the stones and the sleeping gardens beyond the walls. Somewhere, not far away, a clock strikes the hour, its chimes reaching the back room as little more than a suggestion, a series of faint, bell-like tones that arrive through the layers of brick and plaster and fabric with all their sharpness smoothed away, so that they sound less like the marking of time and more like the memory of it, a gentle reminder that the hours are passing, though within this room they seem to pass more slowly than elsewhere, as if the room itself existed at slight. Removed from the ordinary current of the evening, a small eddy in the stream of time where things are permitted to take as long as they need. Mr. Hale does not count the chimes. He is aware of them in the same distant, unhurried way that he is aware of the rain and the lamp and the warmth of the room, and they do not alter the pace of his work or the direction of his thoughts. He is thinking, if thinking is quite the right word for this slow, drifting sort of contemplation of the fabric that will eventually cover this chair, a piece of crimson velvet that the customer, a Mrs. Ashworth, selected some weeks ago from a book of samples that Mr. Hale keeps in the front room for such purposes. The velvet is a good one, dense and closely woven, with a nap that catches the light and releases it in shifting tones of red and dark rose, depending upon the angle at which it is viewed. It is the kind of fabric that feels alive beneath the hand, that responds to touch with a warmth and a softness that are quite unlike the stiff formality of a brocade or the cool smoothness of a satin. Mrs. Ashworth chose well, though Mr. Hale suspects she was guided as much by instinct as by knowledge, for she is not a woman who professes any particular expertise in matters of upholstery, only a quiet certainty about what she likes, which is, in Mr. Hale's experience, often a more reliable guide than expertise. The velvet is upstairs, in the small room above the shop where Mr. Hale keeps his stock of finer fabrics, wrapped in a length of brown paper to protect it from dust and from the light, which can, over time, fade even the most robust of dyes. He will not need it for some days yet, for there is still the matter of the stuffing to attend to, the horsehair that must be teased and laid over the Hessian in an even layer, then covered with a sheet of scrim and stitched in a place with rows of blind stitching and top stitching that will give the seat its final shape and firmness. This is the work of tomorrow and perhaps the day after, depending upon how the horsehair behaves, for it is a material with a character of its own, springy and resistant, inclined to bunch and curl if not handled with the proper combination of firmness and patience. But that is tomorrow's concern, and Mr. Hale does not trouble himself with it now. The present moment is sufficient. The tack goes in, the Hessian lies flat, the springs breathe beneath their covering, and the rain falls quietly upon the world outside. These are the facts of his evening, and they are enough. He sets the last tack along the front rail and lays the hammer down upon the bench. The Hessian is done. He runs his hands over the surface one final time, feeling for any irregularity, any place where the fabric might have gathered or where a tack might not have been driven fully home, and finding none, allows himself a small, inward satisfaction, the kind that does not announce itself but simply settles like warmth into the chest. He leans back slightly on his stool, resting his hands upon his knees, and lets out a long, slow breath. The room holds him. The lamplight holds him. The gentle, persistent sound of the rain holds him. For a moment, he simply sits, his body still, his mind at rest, the chair before him quietly waiting for its next layer of care, and the evening stretching outward in all directions, unhurried and complete. He rises slowly, feeling the stiffness in his lower back that has become a familiar companion at the end of long hours of seated work, and crosses to the shelf where a small kettle sits upon a spirit lamp. The kettle is of blackened copper, dented along one side where was dropped some years ago and never quite restored to its original shape, and it holds enough water for a single cup of tea, which is all that Mr. Hale requires. He lights the spirit lamp with a match from a box on the shelf, and the small blue flame catches and holds, sending a barely perceptible warmth upward toward the base of the kettle. He will wait. The water will take its time. There is no urgency. While the kettle heats, he moves among the furniture in the room with the easy familiarity of a man navigating the corridors of his own mind. He pauses beside the parlor chair with the green damask, running his fingers lightly over the completed seat, feeling the firmness of the padding beneath the fabric, the even tension of the covering. It is good work, solid and true, the kind of work that will endure for years, through suppers and conversations, and the slow accumulation of evenings spent in its embrace. He straightens a fold in the damask where it meets the frame, though the fold is so slight that no one but he would have noticed it, and moves on. The footstool catches his eye as he passes, its bare frame sitting patiently upon the bench, and he picks it up, turning it in his hands, examining the joints where the legs meet the rails. The joinery is sound, the mortise and tenon fitting closely, with no wobble or play, which tells him that the frame was made by a competent hand, someone who understood that the beauty of a piece of furniture begins not with the fabric that covers it, but with the bones beneath. He sets it down again and makes a mental note to begin the re-webbing in the morning, after he has attended to the horsehair on Mrs. Ashworth's chair. The kettle begins to murmur, a sound so low and so gradual in its arrival that it seems less like the boiling of water and more like a thought forming slowly in the back of the mind, gathering itself quietly before it is ready to be expressed. Mr. Hale returns to the shelf and takes down a small brown teapot, its glaze crazed with fine lines where the heat of countless brewings has worked its way into the clay. He measures the tea from a tin caddy, a single spoonful of leaves that are dark and tightly curled, and places them in the pot. When the kettle reaches its full voice, a gentle, steady hissing that fills the room with a sound like distant applause, he lifts it from the flame and pours the water over the leaves, watching as the liquid darkens and a thread of steam rises into the air, curling and dispersing like a thought released. He sets the pot aside to steep and returns to his stool, though he does not take up the hammer or the tacks. Instead, he sits quietly, his hands resting upon his thighs, and lets his gaze wander over the room. The half-finished chairs, the rolls of fabric, the tools upon the shelf. All of these things are known to him with an intimacy that goes beyond mere familiarity, for they are the substance of his days, the materials from which his life is made, quite as much as the horsehair and the hessian are the materials for which a chair is made. He has spent more hours in this room than in any other place on earth, and it has shaped him as surely as he has shaped the objects within it, wearing smooth the places where he sits, warming the air with his breath, filling the silence with the small, accumulating sounds of his labor. There is comfort in this, not the fleeting comfort of novelty or excitement, but something deeper and more enduring, the comfort of knowing one's place in the world and of occupying it with a quiet, undemonstrative competence. Mr. Hale has never aspired to grandeur. He does not dream of a larger workshop or a more fashionable clientele. He is content with what he has, with the steady procession of chairs and sofas and footstools that pass through his hands, each one arriving in a state of disrepair or plainness and departing restored, renewed, made ready to receive again the weight and the warmth of human use. It is a modest ambition, perhaps, but it is one that he fulfills each day with a thoroughness that leaves no room for regret. The tea has steeped. He pours it into a cup, a sturdy earthenware thing with a chip along its rim that his thumb has learned to avoid, and holds it between his palms, feeling the warmth pass through the clay and into his skin. The first sip is always the best, the heat of it spreading through him like a slow tide, reaching the places where the cold and the stiffness have settled and easing them gently away. He sips again, and the flavor, faintly smoky, slightly bitter, entirely familiar, fills his mouth and seems to clarify the air around him, making the lamplight a shade brighter, the shadows a shade softer, the rain a shade more musical. He thinks of nothing in particular, or rather, he thinks of everything in the way that one does when the mind has been released from the necessity of focused thought and is free to drift where it will. He thinks of the horsehair and of how it will feel tomorrow when he teases it apart with his fingers, separating the long, springy fibers and laying them in an even layer across the hessian. He thinks of the curved needle he will use for the blind stitching, and of the particular angle at which it must enter the scrim to catch the hair beneath and draw it outward toward the edge of the seat, building the firm, square profile that is the mark of good work. He thinks of Mrs. Ashworth's crimson velvet, and of how it will look when it is finally stretched over the completed padding, the deep red of the fabric catching the light of her dining room and lending a richness to the room that was not there before. These thoughts do not hurry. They arrive and depart at their own pace, overlapping and intermingling like the sounds of the rain, each one contributing to a general sense of calm and continuity that is more than the sum of its parts. Mr. Hale sips his tea and lets them come and go, feeling no need to hold on to any of them or to direct them toward any conclusion. The evening is doing what it has always done, what evenings have done since long before Mr. Hale was born and will continue to do long after he is gone, which is to draw the day to a close and to offer, in its place, a space in which stillness can be found. The lamp burns on. The rain falls. The chair sits upon its trestles, its Hessian new and smooth, its springs waiting beneath, and Mr. Hale sits beside it with his tea growing slowly cool between his hands, and the silence of the back room gathers around him like a garment, soft and close and perfectly fitted. After a time, and it is impossible to say how long, for time in this room does not move in the manner to which one is accustomed. Mr. Hale sets down his cup and rises once more from the stool. He crosses to the chair and stands before it, looking down at the work he has done, not with the critical eye of one searching for fault, but with the quiet regard of the man who has done what needed doing and who sees the result with something approaching fondness. The Hessian is flat and taut. The tacks are evenly spaced. The corners are clean. It is not a thing that anyone will ever see, for it will be covered by layers of hair and scrim and wadding and fabric, buried beneath the surface of the finished piece like the foundation of a house beneath its walls and floors. But Mr. Hale knows it is there, and he knows it is right, and that knowledge is its own reward. He draws the curtain aside and steps through into the front room, where the window looks out upon the street. The rain is still falling, steady and soft, and the gas lamp at the end of the road casts its trembling light upon the wet stones, which gleam and darken in turn as the flame shifts within its housing. The street is empty now. The last of the day's foot traffic has retreated indoors, and the doors and shutters along the terrace are closed, each household sealed within its own small world of fire and lamplight and familiar warmth. A horse and cart stand at the far corner, the horse's head lowered, its coat dark with rain, its breath visible in the cool air as a series of slow, white plumes that form and dissolve with the regularity of a sleeping creature's breath. Mr. Hale watches the street for a moment, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his reflection faintly visible in the glass, a pale shape superimposed upon the darker world beyond. The shop is quiet around him, the books of fabric samples on the counter, the calendar on the wall with its dates marked in pencil, the small bell above the door that will not ring again until morning. He feels the day settling upon him, not heavily but gently, like a blanket drawn up by careful hands. He turns from the window and begins the small, familiar rituals of closing. He checks the lock on the front door, though he knows it is already fastened. He lowers the wick of the lamp in the front room until the flame gutters and dies, leaving the room in a soft gray half-light that comes partly from the street lamp outside and partly from the glow of the back room, which still shows through the gap in the curtain. He returns through the curtain to the back room, where the oil lamp continues to burn, its light now the only illumination in the whole of the workshop, a single golden point in the gathering darkness. He does not extinguish this lamp immediately. Instead, he sits once more upon his stool, not to work, but simply to be here, in this place that knows him so well, for a few moments longer. The horsehair in its sacks breathes softly, or seems to, the dry, animal scent of it mingling with the faint sweetness of the beeswax that he uses to condition the wooden frames and the sharper, cleaner scent of the linseed oil that he rubs into the tools to keep them from rusting. These are the smells of his life, as familiar to him as the smell of bread is to a baker or the smell of soap to a laundress, and they surround him now with a warmth that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with belonging. The rain has not stopped, but it has changed almost imperceptibly from a steady fall to something lighter and more intermittent, as though it were beginning to lose interest in its own persistence and were considering, in a vague and unhurried way, the possibility of letting the clouds thin and the sky clear. Mr. Hale can hear the change in the sound it makes against the wall, a softening, a slight increase in the spaces between the drops, as though each one were taking a little longer to gather itself and fall. It is the sort of change that one notices only when one has been listening for a long time, without trying to listen, when the ear has become so accustomed to a particular sound that any variation in it registers with the subtle clarity of a change in the color of the light. He picks up the cup of tea, now quite cool, and takes a final sip, more out of habit than desire. The flavor has flattened with the cooling, but there remains in it a ghost of the warmth it once held, a trace of the comfort that it offered when it was first poured. He sets the cup down beside the lamp and lets his hands rest in his lap, palms upward, the fingers slightly curled, as though they were still holding something, the memory of the hammer, perhaps, or the texture of the hessian, or the cool roundness of a tack press between thumb and forefinger. The room is very still. The lamp makes its small, continuous hiss. The rain taps its gentle, irregular rhythm. Somewhere behind the walls, the old timbers of the building settle and shift with the faintest of creaks, the sound of a house that has stood for many years and has grown accustomed to its own weight, accepting it with the patience of something that has no intention of going anywhere. These sounds form a kind of music, though music is perhaps too deliberate a word for something so quiet and so unintentional. It is more like a conversation held between the various elements of the evening, a murmur of rain and wood and flame and silence, each one speaking in turn, and all of them, together, saying something that cannot be translated into words, but that can be felt in the way that warmth can be felt or the presence of someone familiar in a room. Mr. Hale feels it now. He feels the room around him, the objects within it, the tools and the materials and the half-finished things, all of them resting in their places with the quiet composure of creatures that are certain of their purpose. He feels the chair before him, waiting for its horsehair and its velvet, patient as only an inanimate thing can be patient, which is to say, infinitely and without complaint. He feels the evening outside, the rain and the darkness and the gas lamp trembling at the end of the road, and he feels himself within all of this, a part of it, held by it, as the springs are held by the webbing and the hessian holds the springs. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is the whole of the evening contained within this small room, and it is complete. He reaches for the lamp and turns the wick down slowly, watching as the flame diminishes from a golden oval to a thin blue line, and then, with a final, barely audible sigh, extinguishes itself. The room does not plunge into darkness, but receives it gently, the shadow arriving not all at once, but in stages, filling the spaces where the light had been with a softness that feels almost tangible, like velvet drawn across the surface of the air. In the darkness, the sounds of the room become clearer. The rain, now very light, the faint ticking of the building settling, the slow, steady sound of his own breathing, which he does not attempt to control or direct, but simply allows, in and out, each breath a little slower and a little deeper than the last, until it seems to him that his breathing and the breathing of the room are the same thing, a single, shared rhythm that requires no effort and no thought, only the willingness to be still and to let the evening do what it does best, which is to lead, gently and without hurry, toward rest. The chair will be there in the morning. The horsehair will be there. The needles and the twine and the crimson velvet, all will be waiting, just as they are now, patient and undisturbed. And Mr. Hale will return to them, as he always does, with hands that have been rested and a mind that has been quietened by sleep. And the work will continue, as it has continued for 20 years and more, one tack at a time, one stitch at a time, one chair at a time, until the room is full of finished things and the day is full of hours that have been spent well. But that is tomorrow. For now, there is only this, the darkness and the rain and the slow, sweet drift towards sleep and Mr. Hale, seated in his quiet back room among the half-finished chairs and the rolls of fabric and the tools of his gentle trade, allows himself to rest within it, as naturally and as completely as a stone rests at the bottom of a still pond, held by the water, held by the earth, held by the quiet certainty that all things, in their time, come to rest. And if you're still listening, still resting gently wherever you are, then perhaps you too can feel something of what Mr. Hale feels in this moment, the deep, unhurried peace of a day that has been lived with care, and an evening that asks nothing of you, but that you allow yourself to be held by it. Let the rain be your companion. Let the silence be your blanket, and let your thoughts settle as softly as horsehair laid upon Hessian, without effort, without direction, simply falling into place. And so the evening folds itself around you, as it folds itself around the workshop and the street and the town and the hills beyond, and the world grows very still and very kind and very near to sleep. Thank you so very much for spending this quiet evening with us here at Mystic Sleep Tales. It has been a pleasure to sit beside you in the stillness. If you found rest in these gentle words, you are most welcome to stay a while longer to listen again whenever the evening calls you. And if you wish, to leave a quiet word below so that we might know you are here. Sleep well, dear listener. Sleep softly.